The politics of climate is next, and a tale of three nations, Australia, the US and Germany, and their different reactions to renewable energy. In Australia, blackouts last month in Victoria and South Australia fired up all the usual debates about the reliability of renewables, even though a new report from the Grattan Institute argues that 97% of outages are to do with power transport, that is, the poles and wires. And the Australian government is pushing forward with its plan to underwrite new power generation projects, including coal-fired power stations, on the basis that what Australia needs is so-called fair dinkum power. Well, case study two, Germany, where Chancellor Angela Merkel has announced Germany will completely phase out coal power in less than 2 decades. The announcement may be born out of political expediency. The German Greens party received record votes in last year's regional elections. And case study three, the US, where a new generation of idealistic young Democrats in the House of Representatives are talking about a Green New Deal, an ambitious plan to address climate change and inequality at the same time. Here's rock star representative from New York, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Today is the day that we truly embark on a comprehensive agenda of economic, social, and racial justice in the United States of America. That's what this agenda is all about. Because climate change and our environmental challenges are one of the biggest existential threats to our way of life. There is no combating climate change without addressing what has happened to Indigenous communities. That means that there is no fixing our economy without addressing the racial wealth gap. That means that we are not going to transition to renewable energies without also transitioning frontline communities and coal communities into economic opportunity as well.
So, Meg, there you have a rallying cry. Angela Merkel's come out with this big announcement about, within a short space of time, no more coal. It's interesting how that contrasts with the narrative we so often hear in Australia about we better do something about climate change, it'll all be doomed, There's a ticking time bomb. How do you, what's the difference, do you think?
I think the Germans believe the science. I think they are smart enough to engineer around all of the changes to help a country transition to renewable energy. I think they understand that if they transition and they transition faster than the rest of the world, it's going to be cheaper for them in their country, and it becomes a competitive advantage. That's unfortunately for Australia, I feel like we're missing out on that opportunity. We have so much available energy if we actually used our intellect to actually harness some of that. For God's sake, we invented the Wi-Fi. I mean, we can actually do this. And if the government continues to support the creation or the building of new coal-fired stations, for me, what that means is that we are entrenching into our electricity prices a higher level of cost that we all have to pay for. So the faster we transition, the faster we get to a cheaper level of electricity. The other thing about renewable energy, what we've seen from the summer we've actually been through, is that renewable energy, especially when it's coupled with battery technology, provides a lot of stability into the system. So it actually can jump into stabilise our grid when coal-fired station takes actually a long time to just sort of burn up and to sort of get going when we've got instability within the grid. So there's an opportunity here for our country not to miss. And I think Germany has done the right thing. They can see what's coming in the future, and we need to be on the same track.
But see, Dee, the ALP target is 50% renewables by 2030. 50% by 2030. Merkel's talking a couple of years later at 100%. The coalition says it won't have a renewable target after 2020. But here we have state governments. New South Wales was the latest one to say, here you go, have some money to put solar panels on your roof, various schemes to do that. I mean, has the political class in Australia underestimated the public enthusiasm for this?
Yes. And I sit in focus groups in places like regional Queensland, and this is where the Liberal Party get it so wrong. I sit there and I listen to people who live in regional towns. They believe in solar. They're living in a really hot climate. They believe in climate change. So the Liberal Party who thinks there's a silent majority who don't believe in it are completely wrong. But also the evidence. We see in Victoria the blackouts came because coal-fired power stations failed. They got their electricity, they had to borrow it, if you like, from South Australia. 25% of South Australia's electricity is now renewable. But where I think sometimes the scientists get it wrong is they talk in Australia in such doom and gloom terms.
Right.
Even though they're correct, it makes the public tune off because it's so scary. Whereas what we're seeing with Germany and with America is when you can combine it with this sense of hope and that things can be done, you can actually bring people along. And if you scare them, you actually turn them off.
And Catherine, I'm interested, what do you think of this idea of the new Green Deal or the Green New Deal? So there's FDR coming out of the Great Depression and saying we need a new deal.
Yep.
And what he was talking about was social security. He was also talking about major infrastructure projects to haul people in the dust bowls out of that 25% unemployment, that Depression era malaise. And now you've got this young woman who is the spearhead for all of this, talking about a Green New Deal. Is it anything more than just a great slogan?
I hope not. For their sake, I hope not. And we have a lot to learn. I'm currently reading John Chifley's War, and the author's just gone out of my head, but he was on the Reserve Bank for a while. But it's a wonderful framing of how John Curtin saw the future after the Second World War,
right.
and without any understanding that was a cataclysmic event, that it changed the balance of power.
And what's the comparison now?
And the comparison now is you need vision. You need that wonderful V word. You need to have a I believe we need to take a bipartisan stance here, both parties, and almost take this whole concept of renewables and electricity generation for the next century right out of the hands of the politicians.
But would that be appealing to conservative Australians?
I think you know what is appealing to everyone is a sense of leadership. And what I think we've been missing for the last 10, 12 years, for a whole variety of reasons, which we can go into if you want, is that sense of direction and leadership. And now FDR lived in a different world than the world we live in today, where everybody has 5 seconds worth of fame and, lets you know what they think within 2 seconds. And all of our phones are going off at the moment. But I think that notwithstanding, it's about creating a new way of dealing with what are really tricky basic
and she connects
issues.
things. So this
And
is the
she's got
difference.
it.
So she says climate change is important,
But it's in conjunction with.
We can't
Yes.
forget about towns who live on coal. What are we going to do about
That's
them
it.
at the same
Yes.
time? And this is where I think we've created this us and them thing, because people who are living in coal towns say, well, you don't care about me. And
Yes.
she's saying we actually have to look at both things if we're going to change.
And so you think that's genius. Well, what do you think, Sulette? The linking of inequality
So there are a
climate
couple of
change.
things. The vision thing is absolutely spot on. I mean, right now, I'm sorry to say, so much of Canberra is a vision vacuum. That's just the reality, and particularly on climate change issues. In terms of coal is jobs of the past. And that doesn't mean that we should abandon towns that revolved historically in the Latrobe Valley or elsewhere around coal mines. It means we need to retrain with technologies of the future. One thing that people don't talk about is so much of our growth in electricity demand has actually been met by demand management technologies. Smarter lights, smarter heating, smarter ways to insulate buildings. This has been where the big growth has been. And that's where jobs of the future ought to be, because those are jobs that are around intelligent technologies and better ways to save our planet. I think the other things that are important to mention are coal is something that is actually extremely expensive. It's just that it's amortized over 20 or 30 years. If you put in 2 500 megawatt stations, those are billion-dollar projects. But if you put in some sort of energy efficiency improving at home, you're expecting a payback on that of 2 or 3 or 5 years. It's very difficult to compete. So ways to level that playing field for investment are important. And finally, I'd say on the issue of security, including national security, the faster we can swap to renewables in an economic way, the more secure Australia is, the more its power is generated here, and that's also true for security of supply in terms of electrical power outages.
Okay, and Dee, just on the issue of political strategy, to wind this up. So, wily Angela Merkel has said, I think we're right for this. I think I can come out and say this, and at the same time they're getting rid of nuclear energy because of Fukushima. And she's going, I reckon we're good for this. The car industry will be right. We can make this happen. On the other hand, you've got that inspirational young woman from America who's presenting taking a very different political strategy of vision and you know, the legacy of the New Deal. What political strategy would work in Australia?
Three things. Like the green energy, the environmental, there's a certain cohort that will absolutely work on, and it's an increasingly wider cohort. Jobs, you know, particularly so many manufacturing jobs have gone. If we can bring back manufacturing jobs, and cost of living, if we can bring down the cost. If you can, the cost of power. If you can, those three things, you can sell it on, you can get it through.
On manufacturing, though, I'm sorry, it's not because of renewable energy that those jobs are actually lost. It's being lost because of AI and...
Yeah, no, what I'm saying, though, is new jobs created, new manufafacturing jobs to replace ones that have gone because technology has changed.
The new economy,
And I think that comes back to Sulette's comment too, that it's in those communities which. So I worry about the people of Townsville. So they don't have the Adani mine. They've lost that man that sent them. You know, didn't pay them out. What was his name?
Clive Palmer.
Funny, I never remember.
That is a good block.
I can't remember him. I wonder why not. But I feel for those communities, so the key again comes back to the education. What's happening with those kids, and how do we reskill the current workers? Key issue.
Last Thursday on The Drum, we devoted our entire program to examining the gender imbalance in federal politics.